Dark Souls is a game, and games are pretty rad. Siegmeyer of Katarina. The first boss you encounter is the Forever Thick Asylum Demon. Dark Souls 1 is not only one of the most influential games to have come out in the past decade, but it's also had a huge influence on a ton of other games that have come out, as well as influence in the headlines to a ton of horrible headlines written by hack journalists, such as Cuphead is the Dark Souls of Looney Tunes, Red Dead 2 is the Cuphead of respiratory disease, Hearts of Iron 4 is the Cuphead of committed war crimes, and Dark Souls 2 is the Dark Souls of Dark Souls sequels. Nice segue, Bowie. Thanks, Bowie. I really appreciate it. So Dark Souls 2 released in the uneventful year of 2014. And following the success of Dark Souls 1, which to the surprise of many, including From Software, the people who made it, was a big success despite its difficulty. So when FromSoft saw this, they thought it was solely the difficulty that made Dark Souls 1 good. And they took that idea and they ran with it. No, it was not the creativity and world building of the first game that made it so good. It was the horrible difficulty of the first game. It was all the difficulty and nothing else. Not gameplay, not even the creative director who, let's not forget, we're gonna have sent off to work on some PlayStation exclusive, some dumb little baby game called, I don't know, like Bloodborne? I don't know, I forget the name, it's so stupid. So what you end up with is a game that feels like as if it's puppeteering as the first game, while not truly having the same feel, and overall just feels like a more lackluster experience. So at first glance, the game plays pretty much the same. You attack, you roll, you attack, you roll. I don't really know why I play these games. Now, something that should be established before talking about what really irks me about Dark Souls 2 is something called invincibility frames. Invincibility frames are frames at the very start of the rolling animation. When you roll out of the way of attacks, you roll. These invincibility frames give you breathing room, so not every roll has to be pitch perfect. Now, for some reason, they took this fundamental game aspect and made it tied to a stat that you can level up. In Dark Souls 2, there's a stat called agility. It doesn't even tell you this, by the way. Let me make that clear. As you level up agility, the more invincibility frames you get. So you start out with horrible invincibility frames, very low, and you barely can do anything. You can barely get out of the way of anything, which makes it so the player doesn't want to do that. They don't want to do that because when they do it, they die. You teach them early on not to do that when it's like a core part of the game. And so many players, many who started off playing Dark Souls 2, including myself, are confused and don't really get it because it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. I'm sorry, Todd Howard. Making it so that rolling around is tied to a stat, one of your main ways of evading getting clobbered. Making that tied to a stat makes it so players funnel all of their levels into that one stat and leaving very little room for anything else. And it really restricts exploring different styles and playing different modes of just style and play, and I don't know what I'm on about. The game's difficulty is also pretty awful. Not in the sense that it makes you want to pull teeth out like the classic Dark Souls feel, but it just isn't fair in a lot of cases. A lot of traps that you couldn't really see coming, a lot of unpredictable enemy placements. Whereas the first game, the difficulty was a result of just all these interesting mechanics and genuine challenge put into each and every encounter, instead of just you being slapped in the face by the developer. Moving along, you're not getting a fancy segue for this one. I can't bother. The The art style of the first game is wonderful. It's beautiful. It has a great dark medieval style that has sprinkles of a Lovecraftian feel here and there, especially with some of the later boss designs. It's all just beautiful. It's really beautiful piece of art. In the second game, there aren't any bosses or enemies or no little henchmen. First game, you had men with snake heads and frogs and furry, and it was great. It was fantastic. But in the second game, you have like knights, a monk, Vikings, more knights, a couple more knights, a paladin? I don't know. Either way, point being, the second game has very, very little diversity when it comes to enemies and bosses. Don't get me wrong, I think knights are pretty cool. I think they can be really cool, especially in a setting which warrants knights. However, it gets played out really fast in the second game. Whereas in the first game, not only is it used with a level of creativity, but it's used sparingly. And I didn't even know you had to use knights sparingly until Dark Souls 2 happened. The knight enemies in Dark Souls 2 really take away that je ne sais quoi that the first game had. It really makes it feel less unique. And it just looks bad overall, I think. Dark Souls 2 originally was going to incorporate this really moody lighting that would have required you to walk around with a torch and made it feel more like a mysterious adventure. But at the very last minute, they cut that all out. And instead of fixing it, instead of making it look good, they just turned up the brightness in a ton of different areas. And it looks like garbage. And it looks unfinished. It looks like a mod. It looks very unprofessional and just ugly and flat everywhere. Some places look nice, like that area with the fire. And so what you have is a really unappealing world. So regardless of how bad the gameplay is, you don't even really want to be in the world because it's so hideous. And let me get it clear. Dark Souls has never been the Mona Lisa of video games. It's been pretty messy at some points. It's not the most graphically intensive. However, what it lacked in literal fidelity, it made up for in style and heart. What it lacked in fidelity, it made up for in style, creativity, and soul. Dark Souls. And keep in mind, this game, Dark Souls 2, came out in 2014, a year after games such as GTA 5, Last of Us, and Metal Gear Revengeance. In conclusion, I hope you enjoyed reading this essay as much as I enjoyed writing it. And don't let this video take away from your personal experience of playing Dark Souls 2, all right? Although I think it squandered a lot of its excellent potential, this shouldn't let you not be able to enjoy the game. I think I beat it. I played it all the way through. I beat it. I did use a guide. I used multiple guides. But regardless, even if I played it out of spite and anger and malice, that doesn't mean you can't play it out of love, joy, and a little bit of gamer energy. I hope this video wasn't too awful. I'm out of breath. I hope it wasn't horrible. I hope it turns out somewhat coherent. But thank you.